Welcome to the Family Office Project, a series of discussions with family office executives and professionals on risk management, operations, financial, and technology issues facing business owning families and their family offices. I'm your host, Jon Carroll, and my guest today is Webb Stickney. For the past 40 plus years, Webb has worked with enterprise owning families, both in the operating company and also in the family office. So he knows both sides of the story. Webb really understands the multi-layered risks and the risk environment that face business owning families and the business management best practices used by most successful family offices. In our discussion today, Webb and I are going to explore risk management challenges facing families and the best practices to mitigate risk. So welcome, Webb. It's great to speak with you.
Well, thank you, John. It's good to see you, sir, as always.
Yeah, so before we get started, I should say, in the interest of full disclosure, that Webb and I did have an opportunity to work together in a single family office some years ago. And it was that's how I met Webb, of course, but it was a great experience getting the benefit of his operational and risk management acumen, and also his thinking about the best tools and techniques available and in use to mitigate risk. So let's get started, Webb, with the question that really is sort of an open-ended and a very broad question. But looking back, over the course of your career working with family offices and especially with families who own businesses, which I know you've done a lot of that. What have you identified as some of the biggest risks that these families often overlook or underestimate as they think about risk management in their operating business, in their family office, or when the two interact in a dynamic fashion?
Well, I've seen, based upon the families I've worked with, a kind of, I don't know if it's necessarily a reluctance, but there's been a lack of understanding of their true asset allocation. If they looked at asset allocation in a universal sense and where the family was, then I think that that's part of the risk that they don't see. They're operating businesses. Many of the ones I've worked for, their operating businesses are what brought them their wealth. They were many times first generation entrepreneurs, business owners, and that they did not see as that business was not viewed by them as part of their risk profile. It was something that they believed they controlled. They understood all the aspects of it. They'd worked in all the departments. They had been there 20, 30 years in some cases or more. And there was not this view that was a risk. Their risk was their equity portfolio or their bond portfolio or private equity investments that they had made. That's where they viewed their risk instead of to me, a more universal look, which is your largest single investment in most cases is your core business. And you don't have as much control as you think you do. I think COVID proved that to a lot of people. Life changed for a lot of business owners in COVID, and they began to understand, there was risk in their core business. So I think that's the biggest single theme, John, for me is, you've got a core business. It's what built your wealth. In many cases, it's not necessarily liquid, because it's privately held and there's more risk associated with it than you know or understand.
And in fact, I think the point you're making is that the core business, the operating company, is subject to the market, right? It is your biggest equity investment. So when you think about the operating company in terms of the total investment that the family has across other types of assets, you surely want to make sure that you have the diversification necessary, right, to offset
Yes.
the market risk in the operating company. So how have you seen Have you seen enterprise owning families deal with that in a successful way?
Well, in many cases, either the sale of the enterprise or the sale of a portion of the enterprise, creating diversification of that risk, either bringing on a strategic partner, somebody who can help you operate the business out into the future, bringing in professionals to help lead that business. A second component of that risk is, you know, belief or feeling that your family members are the key leaders to the future. And in many cases, they're not the key leaders to the future. Statistics have borne that out, that in many cases, these businesses, by the third generation, 80 or 90% of them are gone or substantially smaller because they don't have professional management that's been utilized. They've relied on the family and the second generation or the third generation of the family.
Now,
So
I expect you'll see that sort of dynamic at work when the family realizes that perhaps the best next step is to sell either all of the business or a controlling interest or maybe just a minority interest in the business to gain either capital, financial capital, or human capital to help run the business. Have you seen that in the work that you've done supporting families, selling their businesses over the years?
yes, I certainly have. It's a hard realization, and in many cases, John, it's not just an intellectual realization, but it has to be an emotional realization. This is, in most cases, a family brand. It's been in the family for a long time. They've built it. They've become emotionally attached to it, and that's part and parcel of what has to be overcome, is to get them to realize that it's the biggest single risk that they have. And I've historically done that with an asset allocation model that looks at how much residential real estate do you have, how much do you have that's what's the value of your core business, even though in many cases it's not a liquid business. What's your portfolio look like? What other assets do you have? More often than not, they'll see that they have a very large portion tied up in their core business, residential real estate, other assets of high net worth individuals, whether that be yachts or airplanes or, you know, in many cases, they have collections that go along. They're very passionate individuals, and they act on that passion, and they have uh, art collections or car collections or wine collections, and they're they don't view those as part of their profile when it's indeed a very large part of their risk profile.
Now, going back to the point you made earlier about bringing in executive team or outside professionals to support either the acquisition or the sale of an operating business, how difficult is that for the family to get to the point to make that decision? Yeah, we need that help. And then once the decision has been made for the family to, maybe not acquiesce, but to contribute to the ultimate solution with the new executive team.
I think acquiesce is the right word, John. I think that's very often what has to happen. Well, the founders, they see themselves as an unlimited amount of time, and they don't want to face those issues as they move into their latter years. And it's a very, very difficult conversation. It's a conversation that has to have happened many times, and it comes down to really trying to help them clarify what are their goals, what are their objectives, what do they want to do. Do they want this company to be there for the next 200 or 300 years? Do they want it for their great grandchildren? Do they want it as a source of wealth for future generations or not? And there are different answers there depending upon different families' interests and what they want to accomplish.
Yeah, there's not necessarily a right answer.
Absolutely. There is no
right?
single
There's no
right answer there.
right. It's the right answer for the family, and so how do you, Webb, when you're working with families on these business strategy, really thinking strategically about not just getting to the day of the close, right, of the sale of the business, but beyond that, like what happens after that? Many times that's when the family office gets, fully created and becomes fully functional, right, after the operating
Yes.
business is sold. And tell me a little bit about how you work with families to make that sort of transition happen successfully.
Well, it starts well before the sale, and it's really an exercise in helping them and kind of taking them through a process of identifying what are the long-term objectives? What do they want to do? Do they want to fund a foundation? Do they the proceeds, 80% of the proceeds to a foundation for protecting children or child health care or for art education or whatever it is, whatever their passion is, what do they want to do? When do they want that to happen? In many cases, they don't want it too early. And that goes back to coordination with the state planners and setting up all of the entities appropriately and establishing the foundation, governance for the foundation. So it's a process that starts very early, much before any transaction, if you can get the family to face it. Sometimes they don't want to and won't. You try to deal with it as best you can post transaction. So
Well, it sounds like what you're saying is that education and just informing family members of the issues, the strategic issues that they're facing, is a key element in successful transition, selling a business and then moving into a family office environment. Are there any best practices around educating or upgrading the knowledge of family members about what comes next, about thinking about the strategy and the vision for the future?
well, I think it comes best practices for me would be regular family meetings, quarterly family meetings with everybody, all generations involved in the meetings. Unfortunately, what you run into is a lot of entrepreneurs and founders aren't ready for that. They're not ready to share. They're extremely discreet people and they don't want their children to know, or they don't want their children's spouses to know. And so there's a big political minefield that has to be stepped through very carefully as you educate the family on what the future looks like. And in some cases, there are G2 or G3 members that can actually be embarrassed about the wealth that has been created. And that creates a different set of concerns as you move forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's not unusual for people to have very or vastly different reactions to their inheritance, let's say, or their engagement or involvement in a family business. It's not just like there's no one solution. There's no one right way to respond to that sort of situation. But how do you support the positive mitigating of risk when you're trying to build consensus around this transition from you know selling the operating company into a family office? How do you work with the family members to bring them along to understand more fully?
Well, I think that a sharing of as many facts as you're allowed to, or, and dealing and giving them examples of what other families have done can be a good way to begin to deal with that. Sharing how things have gone. I worked with one family meetings were held quarterly, and, one of the siblings, spouses, was not raised in a high net worth atmosphere, was not accustomed to a high net worth atmosphere. They were a school teacher and, very proud of what they did. And even talking about what to do from a philanthropy perspective for this family was difficult for them. They had a real emotional struggle with the magnitude of the wealth that was in in the hands of this family, and it created a great sense of, I'm going to say, anxiety in this individual about participating in philanthropy discussions even. So I think part of it is, John, read the room, as they used to say. You've got to know the family. You've got to understand the different perspectives, the different politics, and try to manage as best you can through that process with the end goal of, establishing a strong family governance and having shared objectives out into G2 and G3, which may not be unanimously shared objectives.
So it sounds like that you've faced challenging situations in your career working with families, enterprise operating company owning families as they do transactions to either buy businesses or sell them, and as they transition to a family office from an operating company environment. I think I heard you say that the best way to counteract and mitigate risk is open communication, having meetings on a regular basis, getting people involved, and really educating them about the opportunities that that their situation presents.
Yes.
As an outsider, as a professional coming in to advise a family, when do you think the right time is? What's the right timing for the family to consider selling their main asset, the operating business?
I think that the conversations have to start early. Many times in my career, John, we've delved into that as part of the interview process, even before I'm brought on board. That can be a great time to get clarity and understanding certainly from the founders or whoever, whatever family members are conducting the interviews, to understand what are their long-term goals and objectives in place. Is
Mhm.
everybody comfortable with those? Um, and many times that's the best starting point, is actually during the interview process. And there'll be some good information to be gleaned from that if you're being interviewed and doing multiple interviews with multiple generations or even multiple members of the family, the founder's family. So
Mhm.
I think that's part, and I think you have to take it easy. You have to begin to earn trust amongst family members. You have to earn their confidence. You have to understand that may want to share things with you that they're not ready to share with other members of the family. They may seek your opinion and they're not ready to share that. They may want your counsel on how do we best bring that up? How do we bring that up in a way that, doesn't necessarily point a finger at me as a family member? Let's put this into the planning process, but don't associate my name with it, in other words. So I've seen that many times when one spouse or the other has a passion, whether that's for, you know, a sports team or an art collection or a car collection or a wine collection. And these are not small amounts of money that are being dedicated to these processes or these collections or passions, if you will.
Mhm.
It's just um, it's an interesting process. I had one spouse who had her partner had an extremely large modern art collection, probably one of the largest modern art collections, certainly in the United States. She didn't understand it. She didn't know how to value it. And she was concerned about the ultimate liquidity of it and if what was being spent on it could be returned in the future. And so that was a major point of concern in that instance. And that was shared with me. It wasn't shared with other members of the family. And that was how she wanted to proceed with that conversation. And you can deal with that. You can address that through asset allocation and trying to understand what was there.
So when you advise a family to begin thinking about and maybe even go to the point of executing a sale of a business, is oftentimes the next step. And I know you've been involved in the transition to a full blown financial and investment, single family office. So I know you've done that on numerous occasions over your career as an executive financial officer and as a just as a consultant, but also as an investment officer. So when you've made that transition, do you find that for the most part, concept of the family office is something that has to be supported by the founders, the patriarch, the matriarch, in order to subsidize the activities of the family office to get the rest of the family to engage in it and to realize the vision of the founders, of the principles?
Questionably, and that's always one of the big hurdles, John, is,
Yeah.
well, you guys have 75 different objectives that you want to accomplish with the family, and you want the family office to manage and oversee the 75 objectives. So that means we're going to have a team of X uh, in that instance, and X, you almost uniformly, John, is too big. It's always too much, too expensive, etc.
I mean, is that in reality or the perception?
That's the perception.
Okay.
That's the perception. That's where they always start with is, oh no, we could do this with two people. No, we can't do this with two people.
Right.
That's always one of the, um, not uniformly, but I shouldn't say always, but more often than not, you run into that.
Yeah, and it's really not about the number of people involved. It's more about the nature of the work. It's, the responsibility of the family office and the sort of risk management and controls that you want to have in place to make sure that your vision is executed as you expect, right?
Absolutely. I've seen a family office where, the senior executive team managed all of the business assets, and there was a separate team, separate entire team with its own leadership in place to manage the households, and which there were numerous households, and to manage the art collection, and that was totally separate. And that was not an obligation of the business executives. We managed the auxiliary businesses. So I've seen that. I've seen where, one or two or three people were expected to manage yachts, airplanes, households, business investments, stock portfolios, and all of the collections. And so I've seen both ends of the spectrum where you
Hmm.
have a large team, separate identities, well laid out, and then where, there's an expectation that three people can manage a diverse array of assets and households and yachts and planes. And so it's always interesting, is they've all been different, which has been part of the fun, John.
Yeah. So we've really touched on a lot of the elements of risk management for a enterprise owning family and also their family office. And um, I just wonder when you look back on your career, what do you think the greatest challenges were, or what were the greatest number of changes? Where did you see the most change um, over the course of your career in working in this environment with business owning families and with their family offices?
When I started, there wasn't even a term for a family office. It hadn't really been identified. It's just, okay, we're going to go over here. We'd sold the core business, and we're going to go over here and we're going to make 10, 15, 20 different business investments. We're going to work on emulating the Warren Buffett model, where we're going to have a lot of businesses that are run by the individual executive teams. And we need a team here to oversee that. And in that day and age, there wasn't a term for a family office. There wasn't, you know. So I think the greatest change that I've seen is, you look at it today, and all of the accounting firms in the world, all the major, you look at the top 10 accounting firms, every one of them has got an established, highly proficient family office practice. They're bringing all types of solutions to family offices, and in the early 1990s, that didn't exist. You went out and you worked on it yourself. You got all types of estate planning and tax planning attorneys, and you put together a package yourself. And now there are numerous solutions out there. Every firm, John, has got a family practice specialty.
Accounting firms and law firms, investment advisory firms, those types
Estate
of firms that are
planner.
now called multifamily offices that
Yeah.
provide an array of family office services and investments.
So if you're not big
Administrative
enough,
family office administrators, right? That just do the back and
if
middle office functions. Yeah,
if you're not big enough to do a standalone single family office, then you go to a
right,
multi-family office, and
right,
you can get the services, those broad array of services at a much lower number of assets under management.
right. Yeah, I mean, so your point is that the greatest change, and I think I would have to agree with you on this, that the greatest change we've seen over the course of our careers, the last several decades, is just the professionalization of this
Yeah.
business entity called the family office. And of course, the family office has lots of different attributes and can be defined lots of different ways. But, basically a set of business activities in support of a family and whatever that means, right? Whether it's financial or investment or operational or philanthropic or governance related, whatever. And also like in your case, Webb, where you worked with families that were to start were enterprise families. They owned businesses. And there's some of the personal things that were done for the family, like taking care of their taxes and, doing some financial reporting and maybe organizing some investment accounting and some investment performance reporting. Those sorts of things just sort of happened as a part of providing overall financial support to the operating company. And since it was privately held, no problem, right? It's just when you have other owners come in that makes it a little trickier, right, to manage. And we've seen a lot of over the past several years, a lot more professionalization of the roles and responsibilities in the family office. And I would agree with you that that is probably the number one change that I've seen over the past several decades.
When we started doing this in the early 1990s, John, we didn't, you know, it was just, we're going to go make this happen. We didn't have a
Right.
roadmap. Everybody, picked up a broom and swept and whatever it took to figure out how to do this, and how to do
Yeah.
it correctly, and how to get the family the management and support that they needed. So I think that's for me. And there's technology solutions out there. Now there are cybersecurity solutions out there. There are professionals in every field that can help you in your family office with very, very niche problems.
And that's the work that you do today as a consultant, the management consultant to families, right?
Yes, sir. Bring
And
it
so
all
you have
together.
you have yeah, you have experience in all of these areas that we've just talked about, whether it's thinking
I
about
have a client.
planning,
I have a
right?
Yeah, I have a client now that he is an entrepreneur. He's got 10 operating companies. Is kind of come up on 70 years of age, and he has spent his life building these operating companies, and now he needs to figure out, okay, what's he going to do? What's he going to do with the next generation? How does he move them on? And he faces the typical challenges.
I mean, he's facing all the issues that we just discussed, right? Family members to succeed, bringing in outside executive teams to run these businesses, sell some of these businesses. Which ones do we keep and why? And if we do have a liquidity event, then what do we do with the liquid assets, right? How do we manage that and go forward? So,
Absolutely.
so a real life, you're involved right now in a real life situation working with a client who's facing all of these risk challenges, right? So let me ask you the final question, Webb, and I really want to thank you for your time today. But when you look forward into the next 5, 10 years, what do you see as the largest or the greatest challenge, from a risk management to a family office or to enterprise owning families for that matter?
Well, I think I'm not sure that that risk has, on an individual basis, has necessarily changed. And I think that the greatest risk 20 years ago and the greatest risk as I look forward is founders, their children, and their children's children believing that they're the best solution for running these enterprises and trying to help them separate running the family office and running the enterprises. And there's a difference. And you can set certain objectives and put a team in place to help you manage the family office. But if you have a large operating business, second generation, third generation may not be the best solution for running that operating business. And the presumption that family members have to go into those roles can be very dangerous and creates additional risk on that enterprise. It's a very, very successful consumer facing business that everybody here would recognize if I named it, and you'd
Mhm.
recognize the family. But the founder of the company recognized early on that his children, his siblings, others were not going to be proficient in the operating business. He put the professionals in who knew what they were doing, and the business is one of the most successful consumer facing businesses in the world today. And his children and his children's children and his great grandchildren are some of the richest individuals on earth, but they're not involved in running the business and the operation of, and that making that distinguishing that, helping the family
Mhm.
understand, I think is a key part of what family office leaders have to do. It's not always comfortable, but I believe it's a key part of what the message that has to be brought across is there, you know, if you want success, if you want your great grandchildren and their children on through the generations, then your best shot is not to give them a job and to assume that because they're your children, they're going to be talented in a particular field, and bring in professional management for not only the operating business, but for the family.
And so really, I think you just pointed out the importance of understanding the sort of the three circle Venn diagram. You've got family, you've got business management, and then you've got the ownership of the business. And those are three sort of separate perspectives, oftentimes held all by the same person. Usually the founder holds all three of those roles, right? But as time
Yes,
goes on, those roles can be, and those responsibilities can be separated and segregated without the family losing the benefit of the business or the even some level of control. So I think you've pointed out that it really is a best practice to think broadly and deeply about the different types of relationships that exist in a family-owned enterprise between family, business management, and ownership. So that brings us to a close, and I just want to say thank you, Webb, for taking time to share your insights with us today. It's really been a
I've
great
enjoyed it.
pleasure. Yeah,
Uh,
well, I've enjoyed it too.
Always good to have a conversation with you. So
Well, thank you for joining us, and I just want to say, if you need to reach out to Webb, his contact details will be in the description. I'm your host, Jon Carroll, for the Family Office Project, saying thank you, and we'll see you next time.